Welcome to JonGetsGames. As selected by the voting level supporters of my Patreon page, today I'll be reviewing Finca. In this game, players play farmers who are harvesting a variety of different foods, which in the game turn out to be wonderfully shaped and vibrantly colored little wooden bits. The farmers are going to be taking the food to various towns that want them in order to get victory points. There is also a wonderful windmill rondo mechanic. First, I'm going to go through some gameplay examples of turns to show you how the game plays, and then I'll jump into my review. Here we have the starting setup for a 3-player game of Finca. This board here has a whole bunch of these little tiles with different fruit numbers on them. This is all randomly associated. And then this windmill has all of these different fruits on these little windmill tiles, and this was also randomly distributed on the board. The last thing that has to happen before we can actually play the game is each player in turn order, starting with red, is going to take one of their farmers and put it down on one of these windmill blades, and they'll take a single piece of fruit that's associated with that blade into their stock, and they will keep doing this around and around until all 3 players have put all 4 of their farmers down onto the windmill. Alright, so now we can begin the game. On each player's turn, they can take a single action from a selection of 3. The first of these is simply moving your farmers around this windmill over here, and I think that's what our red player is going to do. The first thing you do is decide which of your farmers you want to move. In this case, our red player is going to choose this one here. Then you look to see how many farmers are on that windmill tine. We see there's only a single farmer here, which means you're only going to move this farmer one spot. So we take this here, we move it once onto this spot here. Now you look to see how many farmers are on that windmill blade after you move, and that is the number of that fruit that you get from the supply. So in this case, there are 4 farmers on this spot right here, so they're going to take 4 of these figs from the supply and put it into their player area. Because there are so many farmers on the spot, it actually incentivizes people to keep going there. In this case, the green player has this farmer here, and since there are 2 farmers on that spot, they get to move 2 spots. So in this case, the green farmer would probably move twice, get onto this really big tile here, and take 5 of these figs from the supply and put it into their area. It's important to note that if a player ever tries to take resources from the supply and there is not enough to fulfill what they need to grab, then instantly everybody loses all of that type of resource back to the supply, and then that player takes the required amount. So this is a good balancing mechanic to get around people hoarding different types of goods. It's now our blue player's turn, so they could take one of these guys here, and since there are 5 farmers on the spot, they can move 5 spots on the board, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, puts them onto this tile here, which is lemons, and they get to take 4 from the supply because there are now 4 farmers there. At this point, I'm sure you've noticed all these tiles that are face up on the main board, and they have a value on them, which is the number of resources on those tiles, and it's pretty obvious that what we're trying to do is get these resources to match these tiles. But you can't cash in that set collection until you get mules. Mules are here in the middle of the windmill, and you only grab those when you go past this equator line of the windmill with one of your farmers. So because a red player now has all these goods and they want to start cashing it in, they are going to specifically move their farmers to cross this line right here in order to grab a mule. He'll grab this guy. Since there are 4 people on the blade, he moves 1, 2, 3, 4. He gets a lemon from the supply, but more importantly, he crossed the mule line, so he takes one of these and puts it into his area. At this point, let's fast forward through a couple turns till we get to the next thing that I'd like to show you. So now it's a red player's turn, and they have a mule now, which unlocks the ability to do the second type of action on your turn, which is deliver goods to these different towns. Each mule can deliver up to 6 goods at once, and that means players can grab multiple tiles from the board when they are going to the market as long as the numbers on them don't sum to more than 6. At this point, however, a red player does not have any options like that, so they're going to go ahead and grab this tile here, put it into their player area. They discard their mule in order to do this, and then they need to get rid of 2 lemons and 2 figs back to the bank. The number on these tiles indicates the number of victory points that tile gives you at the end of the game. There is one other reason why this number is important, but I'll get to that in just a minute. The last thing before the next player's turn is you flip the next tile up on a spot to make it available to other players. It's now our green player's turn, and they are also going to go to town and sell some of their goods. Looking at the board, we see there are tiles like this, and this indicates that you need to have 5 of the same type of good in order to take this tile. Well, fortunately, our green player has 5 figs right here. They can sell to the bank, but since their mules can allow them to carry up to 6 things, they can also take this tile down here, which is just a single olive, return that to the bank, and now they've taken 2 tiles for that single mule action. Okay, let's fast forward through another couple turns until we get to the next thing I'd like to explain. Alright, so now we're at the blue player's turn, and let's show what that third action type you can do on your turn is. and that involves using one of your special action tiles that each player has in front of them. Now these are one time per game use tiles. As soon as you use them, you get rid of them. And it's important to note that each tile that you still have in front of you at the end of the game is worth 2 points, but let's talk about what these things do. This first one allows the player to move any farmer from anywhere on the windmill to any other spot and take the goods as normal. However, if you cross over any mule lines, you don't actually get any mules for doing it. This second one allows you to send goods to the market with a maximum of 10 goods instead of the normal 6. This is essentially a super mule. Next up, we have the double move tile. This lets you move 2 farmers on your windmill, either the first farmer twice or spread between 2 different farmers to get a whole bunch of goods. And lastly, a player can use this when they are sending goods to the market in order to pay 1 less good. Our blue player has decided to use their super mule, which lets them take 10 goods to the market. The first one they take is this tile right here, which is 5 of the same type of good, so they get rid of these 5 lemons to the bank. The next tile is these 3 figs here. So they were able to get 3 tiles for that action. However, they did need to get rid of this tile, which cost them 2 points at the end of the game. Alright, let's fast forward a bit more. Okay, so the red player took the last tile from this region here, and when that happens, you take this bonus chit, which was also randomly arranged at the beginning of the game, and you look to see who has the most of this particular good amongst the tiles that they've already purchased. In this case, it's an olive, and we see that the red player has 5, the green player has 2, and the blue player has none. And that means that the red player immediately gets this 5-point bonus, and that's going to stay with them until the end of the game. The last thing that happens is we take one of these Finca tokens from the top here, and we put it down onto the board. You'll notice there are only 5 of these, and this is the end game clock. As soon as all 5 of these have been placed onto the board, then the game will end. I've got one more important thing to show you, so let's fast forward until it becomes relevant. Alright, it's the blue player's turn. They're going to use one of their donkey tiles, and they're going to go ahead and grab this tile here. Now if you look down here, you'll notice they only have 5 grapes. So in order to do this, they have to get rid of this special token right here, which is going to give them a -1 discount. As soon as the blue player puts this 6 down here, you'll notice they have 1 of each kind. They have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what players are looking to do is make these sets of numbers because we have these bonus tiles right here. You'll notice on it, it's got 1 of every number, and then in the middle there is a 7. This means since the blue player was the first person to get 1 tile of each, they take this 7-point bonus tile and put it into their area. You'll notice here, the second person to do that is going to get 6 bonus points instead of 7, so it's not the end of the world to not be first, but there is obviously an incentivization to get there first. It's also important to notice that players have the potential to take multiple of these tiles because you can make multiple sets of 1 to 6, and you can work on them at the same time as you're going. You don't need to necessarily get all of the different types of tiles before you can get duplicates. Alright, I think I've shown you pretty much everything I need to, so let's fast forward to the end of the game. It's important to note that as you are trying to assign this bonus tile, if 2 players tie for it, so we see that the red player has 4 of oranges, and so does the green player, then nobody gets the bonus. Alright, so it's the green player's turn, and they are going to end the game. They put this mule back over here, and they're going to purchase this tile here. They have a lot of 5 tiles, as you can see. That costs them the 2 brown and 3 green to the bank. And now let's go ahead and assign this tile here. You'll notice there are 2 different goods on there. You just sum up all the lemons and all of the olives and see who gets the bonus. And with 14 of those, this definitely goes to the green player. And now we put the last wooden Finca down, and the game is officially over, so let's take a look at how the points rack up. In order to count your points, you simply add up all the numbers on all these tiles, you add up your bonuses from the set collection or the Finca locations, and then finally you get an extra 2 points each if you have any of these bonus chits remaining. In this case, the red player has 56 points, the green player has 53 points, and lastly the blue player has 47 points. So for this game, the red player won. If there had been a tie, then you would simply see who has the most remaining fruit left. So let's start off the review by covering the first positive point, which has to do with that wonderful windmill mechanic. First of all, I love that the tiles are all randomized each game so that pretty much every game you're going to play, at least one of the foodstuffs is going to be right next to each other with the different tiles for it. So if you clump your farmers up, which can tend to happen, you might get a whole bunch of that item, and then there'll be a bit of a drought as you try to get back around the windmill. And I just like that every game is going to play differently with those different foodstuffs because they're random. I also love the mechanic of moving your farmers around, and I know that Finca did not invent that. The idea that when you move a piece, it moves X spaces, and X is equal to the number of pieces on that spot. But Finca does it very well. In fact, they kind of double that effect by also having you get X number of food based on the number of farmers on the spot that you land on. So that creates a bunch of interesting decisions because, well, you can pretty quickly look at the windmill and realize what maybe 2 or 3 different type of foodstuffs you have available on a specific turn, but you might be thinking a few steps ahead and jump onto a windmill spot to get some food you don't really care about, but because it means you're probably going to be able to jump ahead and get that one food you really need, and you're going to hope that no players come around and screw up those plans. So in general, I think it's a really elegant and beautiful mechanism, and I love it in this game. Positive point number 2 has to do with the variety of things that you are shooting for in this game. At first look, it looks really simple. You're getting fruit and you're cashing them in for those tiles. Okay, that's the whole game. But it isn't. You are first of all thinking about the set collection of the numbers where you're trying to get a 1, a 2, a 3, 4, all the way up to 6 because you want to get those bonus tiles. Those are very real amounts of points, and you want to do it sooner rather than later because the points only get worse as the game goes on and other players grab those. So it incentivizes you to get a variety of different tiles instead of maybe just shooting for 3s the whole game long because maybe 3 is an easier number to get to. I also love those little Finca bonus chits that get put out into play as soon as the last tile from a stack gets taken because it doesn't just reward the person who took that tile. No, it rewards the person who has the most of that particular good in their area, so you are also planning ahead for that. You can look around and see which stacks are getting low and what is the bonus on that, and that will also influence which of the tiles you take. You might see that the lemon bonus is getting low and you and another player are tied with the number of lemons in your area. Well, you might gun to try and get more lemons to get those tiles in place so that when that last tile is taken, you get that bonus 5 points instead of the other person because 5 points is also a very real amount of points to consider. And then lastly, of course, you are constantly thinking about maximizing the amount of fruit that you can get from the windmill in order to get all these tiles into your area. I think all of these different decisions mesh well together and create a lot of cool things to think about as you're playing. For positive number 3, I'd like to highlight the great player interactions that exist in a game of Finca. I've already talked about a couple of those, one with the 1 through 6 set to grab those bonus tiles earlier to get more points, and also with those little bonus chits that go to the person who has the most of those specific types of foods. Those are both great indirect player interactions, but you also have that rondel with the windmill, and you can see what players are potentially trying to set up. You can see, oh, they really need that 4, and the only 4 on the board needs oranges, and they just put their piece on there to jump over and get oranges. Well, I'm going to jump onto that piece myself, and I'm going to get whatever it is, figs. I could use figs somewhere, but more importantly, now they have to jump 3 instead of 2. They're going to miss that orange, and I am kind of messing with their plans. This is kind of indirect and kind of direct because you are also getting something for that, but you are directly messing with their plans to jump ahead. And then also there is the fact that you can force everybody to lose their goods by taking the last of the resources in that pile, and that can happen once the farmers start to stack up. A couple people can jump on and take 4 oranges, and then 5 oranges, then 6 oranges, and then suddenly there aren't any oranges left, and everybody puts them back onto the board. And this kind of feels much more direct. This also comes into play with those mules. Somebody takes the last mule, suddenly all the mules go back, and that can definitely set people back. And it's a bit more of a direct interaction than you're maybe used to seeing in a Euro, but it doesn't happen that often, and it's somewhat easy to avoid. You just start seeing a run on oranges, well, try to cash out your oranges. If you notice that the mule carts are getting really low, well, maybe do 1 or 2 really inefficient selling actions to the market to just get use out of those tokens before they potentially disappear. So altogether, all 4 of these great player interactions come together in a great way for the game. And the fourth and last positive point is the component quality in this game. I cannot avoid the fact that these bits are wonderful. When you walk by somebody playing this game, you cannot help but notice the little grape bits and the orange bits and the lemon bits, and they all look like the thing they're supposed to be. They're vibrantly colored. They just feel great in your hands. They could have been different colored cubes, but no, they went out of the way to make custom food tokens, which is also going to help with color blindness because all the tokens look different on the board. And the board itself is gorgeous. That windmill is huge and all those wonderful little tiles on it. It's just a vibrant, wonderful package. Every single aspect to it comes together so well, and I just love seeing the game on the table. So now let's jump into my one neutral point, which has to do with those 4 one-time use bonus tokens that each player gets. Now, as a general rule, I don't really like one-time use bonus actions in any game, and the same goes for Finca. I feel like they're kind of like a band-aid that gets stuck on to help people if they dig themselves into a hole. You could teleport your farmer over to the other side of the board and grab that thing that you really need because you found yourself bogged down, or you could do a really big mule card action. Maybe you'll do that after you lost your mule card, or you want to get up to 10 victory point value into your area, and that's fine. I get why those exist, and when you do those actions, it does feel kind of cool doing a really big mule action to get all those tiles down, or the -1 discount to take a tile you really needed right before your opponent, and that was the only 6 on the board, and you could laugh. But in general, it just feels like an inelegant splinter stuck in the side of a perfectly smooth, elegant ball, and I won't play the game without them. I just kind of wish that it had been designed so that they weren't there. And now for the one negative point I have for Finca, which I contemplated not putting in here at all, but whatever, I'm going to say it anyway. This game is pretty out of print, and it is quite expensive to acquire these days. When it first came out, you could grab it for $25 in a whole bunch of different locations, but it has been out of print for several years now, and you are going to be lucky to pick the game up for $45 or so. You are likely going to be spending more than that, which is a bummer because this is an elegant, wonderful game, and it's a bit of a detractor if you have to spend an uncomfortable amount of money to get it down on your table. But ultimately, if you're going to do that, then I think the odds are good you're going to really enjoy that experience, but ultimately, I just figured I'd mention this. So now let's briefly talk about replayability. Long story short, there is so much randomness to the setup of this game that I think the replayability is quite strong. Each game is going to feel much like the last game. Like, you are still moving your dudes around the rondel, you are still picking up those tiles in the area of the island, but each game, your path to victory is going to be slightly different. You're not going to do the exact same moves. You're going to be constantly looking at those bonus chips and trying to maximize them and trying to get your sets before everybody else. That's not going to be different, but the way you're going to go at it is going to be different enough from each game that it doesn't necessarily feel samey, and those interesting decisions that you're making from game to game just continue to be interesting as time goes on. So in general, I think that Finca has a decent amount of replayability. Alright, so now let's discuss player count. Finca plays 2 to 4 players, and the long story short is Finca is very good with all of those different player counts. If I was to nitpick, I would say that the 2-player game is probably best because there is only one person to really analyze what their situation is like on the rondel, and also you're going to take an action and then they take an action, then you take an action, so there's less chaos specifically on that rondel, but also with the tiles out on the board between turns. 4-player games are totally fine in this game, but late game there has the potential for a little bit of analysis paralysis, especially if you're playing with players who are predisposed to that. They might be kind of locking down and saying, well, what options do you have on the rondel? Well, what does that mean out on the board with all these tiles, and what food do you have, and which tiles can you get, and can you get the tiles I want to get, and wait, how many lemons do you have for that one bonus tile versus how many lemons I have? But there is the potential to kind of spiral down a rabbit hole of analysis paralysis, but I've really only seen that happen with people who kind of analysis paralysis on every game. So in general, it's not too bad, and I've definitely enjoyed playing this game 4 players. 3 is also fine, and 2, I think, has the slight edge. In conclusion, I think that Finca is a gem. It is a wonderfully elegant little game that has gorgeous components that just grabs everybody's attention who are playing the game and who are not playing the game. You have those components that just feel great in your hands when you grab them and put them in your area. You really just feel like these are fruit and you're taking them to the market. You also have all these great levels of player interaction. Oftentimes in Euro games, you're kind of just multiplayer solitaire, but you have to pay attention to what everybody else is doing on a short-term level with that rondel to think about, well, are they going to come in and kind of mess up my plan to grab that orange? But also long-term and think, you know, I really want to make sure I have all the olives because that stack with the olive bonus chip is getting low, and I want to be in a position where I'm unrivaled in that situation, and I get those free 5 points without even spending any actions for it. So there are so many things to think about that are just interesting and fun as you're playing the game. And also, I didn't mention it before, but the game plays relatively quickly. Like, you're going to play a 4-player game of this in probably about an hour, and the 3- and 2-player games are going to be quite a bit less than that, unless you happen to be playing with somebody who is very into analysis paralysis, unfortunately. So in general, this is a wonderful game. If you have an opportunity to play it, I highly recommend it. And if you have an opportunity to grab it for a not incredibly large amount of money, I would also highly recommend you go ahead and do that. If you'd like to become more involved with the channel, you can directly support it at patreon.com/JonGetsGames, and I'd really like to thank all of the current Patreon supporters of the page. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to see more in-depth board game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.